Let's open the book on page 50 to start with the reading and speaking part of this unit. When good comes from bad. War may be violent and destructive, but it can also generate some things that are worthwhile. Working groups, look at the 4 headings below: technology, medicine, politics, and society. Use them to list some possible good things that have come out of war. Discuss ideas with the class. بدنا نجرب نلاقي شو هي الأشياء المنيحة يلي كانت نتيجة للحروب من جهة التكنولوجي، الطب، السياسة، والمجتمع. Now, let's read through the texts quickly. Did you think of any of the things mentioned? Make a note of one important or interesting fact from each topic. Compare your ideas with your group. Read the text again. Look at the words below. Which heading do they go with and what is said about them? So نحن وعم نقرأ التكست بدنا ناخد notes عن شغلة وحدة مهمة أو مثيرة للاهتمام تتعلق بكل topic، وبدنا نقول هيدول الكلمات بأي من الtopics بيرتبطوا. Let's listen to the tape script.
Lasting legacies. Barbed wire and other technology. World War I, 1914 to 1918, was supposed to be the war to end all wars, but it was in fact the beginning of all modern conflicts. The new technology that reached the battlefields forever changed the way that armies fought. It could be argued that technology had always played an important part in war, but previously it had not been so sophisticated, and above all, so destructive. However, it wasn't only armoured tanks, high-powered machine guns and aerial bombardment. As Adam Hochschild describes in his essay, To End All Wars, the most important innovation of all was the barbed wire fences, the most unassuming weapon used. What barbed wire did was prevent direct charges on the men in the trenches. Hochschild got it right, unlike Douglas Haig, the commander of the British forces in France. Haig said, "I believe that the value of the horse and the opportunity for the horse in the future are likely to be as great as ever. Aeroplanes and tanks are only accessories to the men and the horse." As on so many other occasions, he could not have been more mistaken. Recognition of PTSD, or shell shock. Psychological victims of war are as old as war itself. The Bible, the Greeks, and Shakespeare all tell us this. But it wasn't until World War I that science began to understand this properly and give the kind of diagnoses that are familiar to us today. During the war, medics still thought that shell shock, as it was known, was down to the physical impact of military explosions. But gradually, another theory began to form: that what caused the peculiar symptoms exhibited by huge numbers of soldiers, 80,000 in the British Army alone, were emotional, not physical stress factors, in particular the proximity to death and the hideous sight of watching a friend or enemy meet a gruesome end. Traumatized soldiers shared many common symptoms such as speech difficulties, twitches, anxiety, and digestive disorders. The thing doctors found baffling was that these symptoms persisted long after the war was finished. It wasn't until over 60 years later, in 1980, in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, that this affliction would be formally recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Blood banks. The first blood banks, called blood depots, were set up by Oswald Hope Robertson, a medical scientist and US Army officer while serving in France in 1917. Just before the war in 1914, it had been discovered that transfused blood could be prevented from clotting if mixed with sodium citrate. In the same year it was established that blood could be stored in refrigerators. These two huge breakthroughs paved the way for Robertson's blood depots. Prior to this, blood transfusions had had to be made vein to vein, directly from donor to patient. Medics used the preserved blood at casualty stations for wounded soldiers. However, survival rates were not good, because one vital thing they had overlooked was the importance of blood groupings. 3 blood groups, A, B and O, had been identified in Vienna in 1901 by an Austrian, Karl Landsteiner. Nevertheless, the wartime advances led to a blood donor service being established in London in 1922. Here, all volunteers were tested for blood group and screened for diseases. The decline of aristocracy.